Hey guys, tonight we're climbing into one of the most overlooked death traps of the Middle Ages, the medieval bell tower. Picture this, you're suspended hundreds of feet above a sleeping town, wrapped in darkness so thick you can't see your own hands, and in about 30 seconds, a bronze monster the size of a small car is going to swing right past your head with enough force to liquefy your skull if you're standing in the wrong spot. The rope burns on your palms are bleeding again. Your ears haven't stopped ringing in 3 years. And congratulations. This is your life now, every single day, until you either fall, go deaf, or die of whatever mysterious illness is currently making its way through the bird droppings that carpet every surface of your new home. You probably won't survive this, but let's be honest, you definitely wouldn't have volunteered for it in the first place. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how far this little bedtime community reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's 3 in the morning, and you're already awake. Not because you want to be, because you have to be. In the medieval world, bells governed everything. They told people when to pray, when to work, when to eat, when to run from fires, and when to hide from invading armies. Someone had to ring those bells, and that someone is you. The position is called a bell ringer, a campanologist, or sometimes just the tower keeper, but really you're more like a prisoner with a job description. You live in the bell tower, not near it, not beside it, in it. Your bedroom, if you can call the freezing stone closet wedged between support beams a bedroom, sits maybe 15 feet below the bells themselves. You don't ease into consciousness. You don't stretch and yawn. The sound hits you like a physical object. The bell designated for matins, the first prayer service of the monastic day, needs ringing at 3 a.m., and your internal clock has been beaten into submission by months of this routine. Except your internal clock isn't what wakes you. It's the cold. The stone walls seem to actually generate cold, as if the tower is some kind of reverse furnace. Your breath comes out in clouds. The single wool blanket you own, threadbare and probably older than you, has twisted around your legs during the night. Your fingers are stiff. Not stiff like, I need to crack my knuckles stiff. Stiff like they might not bend properly for the first 10 minutes you're awake. You're wearing the same clothes you wore yesterday, because those are the only clothes you own. Medieval bell ringers weren't paid well. We'll get into that nightmare later. So your wardrobe consists of one woolen tunic that's more hole than tunic at this point, one pair of hose with the knees blown out, and leather shoes that separated from their soles about 6 weeks ago. You've tied them on with twine. It works mostly. The stone floor is cold enough to hurt through the twine and the flapping leather and your one remaining sock. The ladder to the bell chamber is just 7 feet away, poking through a hole in your ceiling. It's not really a ladder. It's more like wooden rungs hammered into the stone wall at irregular intervals. Someone installed these about 150 years ago, and no one's checked them since. You've learned which ones creak, which ones wobble, and which one, the fourth from the bottom, is definitely going to break one day and send someone plummeting into the darkness below. You avoid that one. Usually, climbing begins. Your hands find the rungs by memory because there's no light up here. Candles are expensive, and besides, open flames near old wood and centuries of accumulated bird nests would turn this tower into a chimney. You don't need light anyway. You've made this climb hundreds of times. Thousands, maybe. Your body knows the way even if your brain is still half asleep. 7 rungs. Duck your head because there's a support beam that juts out at exactly skull height. You learned about that one the hard way, and you've still got the scar. 3 more rungs. Squeeze through the narrow opening into the bell chamber, and the cold up here is different. It's not just cold, it's wind cold, moving air cold, the kind that finds every gap in your clothing and reminds you that you're essentially standing outside, just outside that happens to be 200 feet in the air. The bell chamber has openings on all 4 sides, arched windows without glass, because glass is for rich people and important buildings, and this tower is technically important but practically forgotten. The wind screams through these openings. In winter, snow drifts in and piles in the corners. In autumn, rain slants sideways and soaks everything. Right now, in this pre-dawn darkness, it's just wind, but that's enough. The bell hangs above you, darker than the darkness around it. You can't see it, but you know exactly where it is because you live with this bell. You dream about this bell. The rope hangs down, thick as your wrist, rough hemp that's worn smooth in places and ready to give you fresh splinters in others. You wrap your hands around it. The hemp is so cold it burns. And then you pull. Nothing happens at first. These bells are heavy. Not, oh, that's pretty heavy, but this weighs more than 20 grown men heavy. The bell designated for matins probably weighs between 800 and 1,200 pounds of solid bronze. And it's mounted on a wooden frame that's almost as old as the tower itself. The mechanics are simple and brutal. You pull the rope, which rocks the bell on its axle, which, if you pull hard enough and with the right rhythm, eventually swings the bell far enough that the clapper inside strikes the bronze. You pull again. Your shoulders protest. The bell moves just slightly. You can feel it through the rope, a tiny shift in resistance. You pull again, timing it, adding your weight to the pull. The bell rocks a little more. This is the dangerous part that no one tells you about when you take this job. Well, no one tells you about any part of this job because nobody in their right mind would take it if they knew, but this part especially. You have to build momentum gradually, and during that process, you're standing directly below thousands of pounds of swinging metal that's gaining speed with every pull. The bell moves more freely now. You've got rhythm. Pull, release, pull, release. Your entire body is involved, legs, back, shoulders, arms. This isn't a delicate task. This is manual labor in its purest form, and you're doing it in the dark, in the cold, while standing on a wooden platform that creaks ominously with every movement. And then it happens. The bell swings far enough. The clapper, a heavy iron cylinder suspended inside the bell, swings and strikes bronze. The sound doesn't just enter your ears. It enters your body. It vibrates through the floor, through the walls, through the air itself, through your bones and teeth and eyeballs. It's not a sound you hear. It's a sound you experience, a physical force that reshapes the world around you for the duration of its existence. Your chest cavity resonates. Your vision blurs, not metaphorically, literally, because your eyeballs are vibrating in their sockets. The sound is so loud that it crosses some threshold in your nervous system and becomes something else, something almost like pain but not quite, something your brain doesn't have a proper category for. And you keep pulling because the bell needs to ring 5 times for matins. 5 times the sound has to announce to the sleeping town below that it's time for the monks to wake and pray. 5 times you have to stand here and let this sonic assault happen to your body. 1. Your ears feel full, like they're stuffed with wool, but the wool is made of sound. 2. You've learned to keep your mouth open during the ringing because if you don't, the pressure does something weird to your jaw. 3. There's a technique to breathing between rings, short, shallow breaths, because deep breaths during the ringing make your lungs feel strange. 4. Your hands are bleeding again. Fresh splits in the calluses that never fully heal because you do this every day, multiple times per day. 5. The final ring echoes out across the countryside. Down below, somewhere in the darkness, monks are stirring. Townspeople are rolling over in their beds, acknowledging the bell, starting their days. And you're up here, ears screaming with tinnitus, hands bleeding, body exhausted, knowing that you have to do this again in 3 hours for prime, and then again for terce and sext and nun and vespers and compline. 7 times a day the bells must ring. 7 times a day you climb that ladder. 7 times a day you experience sound as a form of violence. And here's the thing that really makes you want to laugh. If you could remember what laughter feels like. This was the easy bell. The big one, the bell they use for major feast days and emergencies, weighs over 2 tons. You need 3 people to ring that monster, and even with 3 people, it's a nightmare. The rope is thicker. The mechanism is more complex. The sound is so loud that people in the town below have reported feeling it in their chests from hundreds of feet away. But you're not done yet. After matins, you've got 3 hours before prime. 3 hours that are somehow both too long and too short. Too long because you're awake now and cold and your hands hurt and you can't really go back to sleep. Too short because 3 hours isn't enough rest between sessions of physical labor that would qualify as an extreme sport if anyone in the 21st century tried it. You climb back down the ladder. Your quarters await, that generous term for a space that's basically a stone closet with a sleeping mat. There's no fire, because fires in wooden bell towers are how entire cathedrals burn down. There's no insulation because that concept won't really exist for another few centuries. There's just stone and cold, and the constant awareness that in a few hours you're going to do this all over again. Historians still argue whether bell ringers were considered clergy or laypeople. Some towers were manned by monks who took on the duty as part of their religious obligations. Others employed local men, usually poor, often disabled in some way that made other work difficult but still capable of pulling a rope. The pay was minimal, often just room and board, which is a hilarious phrase when your room is a freezing stone cell and your board is whatever stale bread the monastery doesn't want. Welcome to day 1. You've survived the first bell. Only 6 more to go before you can collapse again. And then you get to do it all over tomorrow. And the day after that. And the day after that. The tower doesn't care if you're tired. The bells don't care if your hands are bleeding. The schedule doesn't care about anything at all. You signed on for this, or more likely, you were desperate enough that this seemed better than the alternatives. And now you're here, and the only way out is down. One way or another, eventually everyone goes down. The stairs are going to kill you. Not metaphorically, not eventually, literally, probably soon, and in a way that will leave your broken body wedged in a spiral too narrow for anyone to easily retrieve it. But before we get to your inevitable tumble into oblivion, let's talk about what these stairs actually are, because calling them stairs is generous enough to qualify as medieval propaganda. You're looking at a spiral staircase carved directly into the stone walls of the tower, and when I say carved, I mean someone took a chisel to solid rock sometime around the year 1200 and hacked out these irregular lumps that vaguely suggest the concept of steps. Each one is a different height. Some are 8 inches tall, some are 14. Some are deep enough that your whole foot fits. Others are so shallow that only your toes make contact, and the rest of your foot just hangs out over the drop behind you, hoping for the best. There's no standardization because the concept of standardized measurements is still a few centuries away from being popular, and besides, the mason who built this probably charged by the day, not by the quality. The spiral twists upward or downward, depending on which direction you're going and how optimistic you're feeling about your survival, in a clockwise direction. This wasn't random. Medieval architects designed these spirals specifically to favor right-handed defenders. If enemies came charging up the stairs, they'd have the central column on their right side, limiting their sword arms, while defenders above could swing freely with their right hands. Brilliant military strategy. Absolutely terrible for someone who has to navigate these stairs 7+ times a day while carrying things in the dark, often while exhausted or injured or both. The central column, the stone pillar that anchors the entire spiral, is only about 18 inches in diameter. That means the inner edge of each step, where it meets the column, is impossibly narrow. Maybe 6 inches wide, maybe less. The outer edge, where the step meets the exterior wall, is wider, perhaps 2 feet, but that's where you're closest to the drop. Because there's no railing, no rope to hold, no handrail carved into the wall. Just smooth stone that's been polished by centuries of hands desperately seeking purchase. Hands that were attached to people who are now very much dead, possibly because of these very stairs. The tower you're living in rises somewhere between 150 and 250 feet, depending on whether your cathedral went for impressively tall or compensating for something. Let's split the difference and say 200 feet. A typical medieval spiral staircase has steps that rise about 8 inches each and turn about 30 degrees. That means you're looking at roughly 300 steps from bottom to top, completing about 8 full rotations. 300 opportunities to miss your footing. 300 moments where exhaustion or darkness or simple bad luck could send you tumbling backward into the void. And you make this journey multiple times every day. Before dawn for matins, you're climbing in total darkness. Your eyes haven't adjusted because there's nothing to adjust to. This isn't dim light darkness. This is sealed tomb darkness. The arrow slits that occasionally puncture the wall provide zero useful illumination at 3 a.m. You navigate by memory, by feel, by counting steps, and by the intimate knowledge of every crack and irregularity you've memorized through painful trial and error. Your hands trail along the walls as you climb, fingers reading the stone like braille. Here's where the mortar crumbled away and left a gap you can use for grip. Here's where someone scratched a cross into the wall, probably a previous bell ringer asking for divine protection, which clearly worked out great for them since you have their job now. Here's where water seeps through eternally, making the stone slick with moisture and algae. You know to avoid putting weight on your right foot here because the stone is always wet and your terrible tied-on shoes have no traction whatsoever. The clockwise spiral means you're constantly turning right as you ascend. This does something disorienting to your inner ear after a while. Remember that you're already dealing with tinnitus from the bells, and now add the vertigo that comes from walking in a tight spiral for the equivalent of climbing a 20-story building. Your sense of balance, already compromised, gets worse with every rotation. You sometimes reach the top and feel like the room is still spinning, like you're drunk, except you haven't had anything to drink but stale water in weeks. Going down is worse, so much worse. When you're climbing up, at least you can see or sense the steps ahead of you. Going down, you're stepping into the void with each footfall, trusting that the step you remember being there is still there, hasn't crumbled away, isn't covered in something slippery. Your knees absorb the impact of each descending step, and after 7 trips up and down every single day, your knees feel like someone's been hitting them with hammers. Which, in a way, that someone is you, and the hammer is gravity, and the impacts are cumulative. The width of the stairwell itself is barely 3 feet. If you're carrying something, a bucket of water, a bundle of firewood, a sack of whatever constitutes your meal for the day, you have to hold it in front of you or behind you because there's no room to carry anything at your side. If you meet someone coming the other direction, one of you has to press flat against the outer wall while the other squeezes past. This almost never happens because almost nobody comes up here except you, but on the rare occasions when a priest wants to inspect the bells or someone needs to check on a repair, the awkward dance of passing in the stairwell is terrifying. One wrong move and both of you are tumbling down together in a tangle of limbs and regrets. The steps themselves are worn. Not evenly worn, that would be too convenient. They're worn in the pattern of centuries of footsteps, which means the outer edge, where people naturally walk to stay away from that claustrophobic central column, is noticeably concave. Erosion has turned each step into a shallow bowl, and stone dust fills these depressions. When it's dry, the dust is just slippery. When it's wet, from rain blown in through arrow slits, from snow melt, from the general dampness that pervades the entire tower, it becomes a substance with the friction coefficient of butter on ice. You've already fallen twice. Once going up, when your foot slipped on step 47, you count them now, obsessively, a coping mechanism that gives you the illusion of control. You fell forward, which was lucky, and caught yourself with your hands, which was unlucky, because the stone edges are sharp and you tore a gash across your palm that took weeks to heal and still hasn't healed properly. The second time you were descending, around step 200-something, lost count, didn't matter, and your trailing foot missed the step entirely. You dropped backward, managed to twist and catch yourself against the central column, bruised 3 ribs and felt certain you were going to die. You sat there in the darkness for probably 20 minutes, heart hammering, ribs screaming, unable to make yourself continue down because your body had decided this was it. This was the time. This was when the stairs finally won. But they didn't win that time. You eventually kept going because what else could you do? Stay there forever? Turn into another ghost story the next bell ringer whispers about in the dark? Historians still argue whether medieval towers were intentionally designed to be difficult to navigate as a security feature or whether accessibility just wasn't a concern anyone considered. The truth is probably both. Military towers needed to be defensible. Religious towers needed to be imposing. Nobody designing these structures was thinking about the poor bastard who'd have to run up and down them multiple times daily for years. User experience wasn't in the medieval playbook. Here's a fun quirk that makes this even better. Sometimes you're not alone on the stairs. Remember those roommates we mentioned, the bats, the birds, the pigeons? They don't stay confined to the bell chamber. They use the stairwell. You'll be climbing in darkness and suddenly there's a flutter of wings directly in your face. A bat echolocating at frequencies that hurt your already damaged ears. A pigeon that's decided step 112 is the perfect nesting spot and takes offense at your foot appearing in its personal space. You've learned not to flinch anymore because flinching on stairs this treacherous is how you die. You just keep climbing, keep descending, keep navigating, while wings brush your face and bird screams echo in the narrow spiral. The arrow slits deserve special mention. These narrow openings, designed to let archers shoot out while providing minimal target area for incoming arrows, are spaced irregularly up the tower. During the day, they provide brief moments of illumination. Shafts of light that slice through the darkness of the stairwell, and remind you that a world exists outside this stone prison. But they also create their own hazards. The steps immediately adjacent to arrow slits are often more worn because people naturally gravitated toward the light. And in winter, when wind howls through these openings, the steps near them become ice. Literal ice. You're navigating worn stone steps in the dark while avoiding patches of ice that can't be seen and won't melt because the sun never reaches them. You've developed a technique for the climb that would look absurd to anyone watching but keeps you alive. On the way up, you lean slightly inward, toward the central column, keeping your center of gravity over the wider part of each step. Your hands touch both walls when possible, right hand on the outer wall, left hand on the column, creating a tripod with your body. You test each step before putting your full weight on it, a habit that adds time to every journey but has saved you countless times when you've encountered a loose stone or unexpected debris. Going down requires a different approach. You descend almost sideways, leading with your left foot, keeping your right foot on the higher step as long as possible for stability. You're essentially sidestepping down 300 steps, which destroys your hips over time but is safer than trying to descend forward-facing. Your hands maintain constant contact with the walls, both for balance and for catching yourself when you slip. The worst trips are the emergency trips. When the alarm bell needs ringing, fire, attack, flood, whatever crisis the medieval world has thrown at your town today, you need to ascend fast. Really fast. Lives depend on it. And so you run up these stairs in the dark, throwing caution aside because the urgency overrides the danger. You've never fallen during an emergency run, which is either a miracle or proof that adrenaline is a hell of a drug. But you've come close. So close. Close enough that you remember specific steps where your foot caught air instead of stone, where physics and luck conspired to keep you alive for another day. There's a particular step about 2/3 of the way up. Step 197, your count might be off, but probably not. That's cracked. Not obviously cracked, not oh dear, we should fix that, cracked, but subtly compromised in a way that you discovered when it shifted slightly under your weight one morning. It didn't break. It didn't collapse. It just moved, just a fraction of an inch, just enough to make your heart stop and your bowels clench and your entire life flash before your eyes in the 3 seconds it took to regain your footing. Now you step over that one entirely, which means an awkward long step that throws off your rhythm and creates its own danger. But the alternative is trusting a stone that's already proven it can't be trusted. The physical toll of these stairs compounds daily. Your calves are perpetually tight. Your knees grind and pop with every step. Your ankles have been rolled so many times you've lost count. You've developed a limp, though you can't identify when it started. It crept up gradually, your body's adaptation to the constant stress. Other bell ringers, the ones who survive long enough to retire, which isn't many, apparently all walk with this same distinctive gait, a rolling limp that marks them forever as tower dwellers, even after they've left the tower behind. And here's the thing that really keeps you up at night, during those brief windows between bell-ringing sessions when sleep should be possible. The stairs never get easier. You keep thinking they will. You keep thinking your body will adapt, your muscles will strengthen, your technique will improve to the point where the climb becomes routine. But it doesn't. Every trip is its own battle. Every ascent is a negotiation with gravity and chance. Every descent is a controlled fall that you're trying very hard to keep controlled. You're making roughly 14 trips per day, 7 up, 7 down, which means 4,200 steps daily. That's 29,400 steps per week. That's 1,528,800 steps per year. And each one of those steps is a small gamble, a tiny roll of the dice, a moment where the universe decides whether you live or die. The odds are not in your favor. The stairs are patient. They're stone. They've got all the time in the world. Your flesh and bone and exhaustion. Eventually, the stairs win. They always win. But not today. Today you made it up and back down alive. Tonight you'll do it again. Tomorrow, same thing. You'll keep playing this game until you can't anymore. The stairs are waiting. They're always waiting. Your ears are bleeding again. Not profusely, just a thin trickle of fluid that's probably blood mixed with something else you'd rather not think about. You've stopped checking. What would be the point? It's not like you can do anything about it, and besides, the bells need ringing in an hour, and then again 3 hours after that, and then again, and the blood, or whatever it is, will keep coming whether you acknowledge it or not. Welcome to what medical historians would eventually call bell ringer's disease. Except they won't call it that for another few centuries because right now, in your time, it's just called the way things are. The constant, unrelenting exposure to sound levels that would violate every occupational safety regulation ever written is doing things to your body that you don't have words for. The medieval world doesn't have decibels or hearing damage or tinnitus. They just have the ringing won't stop. And he's gone a bit mad from the bells, and another one fell. Let's talk numbers, because numbers make the horror concrete. A normal conversation registers around 60 decibels. City traffic might hit 80. A lawnmower pushes 90. Anything above 85 decibels with prolonged exposure causes permanent hearing damage. A rock concert can reach 120 decibels. A jet engine at takeoff hits about 140. And a large church bell, the kind you're ringing multiple times daily, rung at close range in an enclosed stone chamber that amplifies and focuses the sound, that's somewhere between 120 and 140 decibels, sustained for the duration of each ring, which lasts several seconds, repeated multiple times per session, 7 sessions per day, every single day, with no hearing protection whatsoever because the concept won't exist for approximately 700 years. Your hearing is gone. Not going gone. It started disappearing within the first month. Initially, you noticed the high-pitched sounds vanishing first. Bird songs became muffled. Speech started sounding like everyone was talking through wool. Now, 6 months in, you can barely hear normal conversation. People have to shout at you from a few feet away. The priest who occasionally checks on you has started making exaggerated mouth movements, basically pantomiming words, because even shouting doesn't always get through. But here's the cruel irony. You can still hear the bells. You'll always be able to hear the bells. They're loud enough to penetrate through destroyed eardrums, through damaged cochlear nerves, through whatever physical mechanisms of hearing you've got left. The bells aren't sound anymore. They're force, pressure, vibration transmitted through bone and tissue and the fluid in your skull. You could be completely deaf to every other sound in the world, and you'd still experience the bells. The tinnitus is its own special nightmare. Tinnitus is from the Latin word for ringing, which would be funny if it weren't so perfectly, horribly accurate. There's a sound in your head that never stops. Never. It's always there. A high-pitched whine that sits just at the edge of perception during the day and becomes overwhelming at night when you're trying to sleep. Except calling it a whine makes it sound simple, singular. It's not. It's a chorus of phantom sounds. Ringing, buzzing, hissing, humming, sometimes all at once, sometimes taking turns. The pitch changes. The volume fluctuates. Sometimes it sounds like the bells are still ringing hours after they've stopped. You've tried everything to make it stop. Putting wool in your ears. That lasted one day before you realized you couldn't hear the rope creaking, couldn't hear the warning signs that tell you when the bell mechanism is about to fail. You need your hearing, what's left of it, to stay alive up there. You've tried pressing your palms over your ears. That just makes the internal sounds louder. You've tried prayer, which is what everyone suggests because medieval medicine's answer to most problems is either pray harder or let's bleed you with leeches. And the leeches seem unlikely to help with this particular issue. The worst part about the tinnitus is that it's not just annoying. It's disorienting. Your brain is receiving constant auditory input that doesn't match reality. And this creates confusion, dizziness, problems with balance and spatial awareness. Which is fantastic news when you're standing on a narrow wooden platform 200 feet in the air, or navigating those death trap stairs, or trying to do literally anything that requires coordination. Speaking of balance, your vestibular system is wrecked. The vestibular system, the mechanism in your inner ear that tells you which way is up, that helps you balance, that keeps the world stable when you move your head, is exquisitely sensitive to damage. And you've been damaged it constantly with concussive sound waves. The result is vertigo. Not the mild, I stood up too fast kind, but the serious, the entire room is spinning and I'm going to vomit kind. It hits randomly. You'll be pulling the bell rope and suddenly the floor tilts 45 degrees even though you know intellectually it hasn't moved. You've learned to close your eyes when this happens, to trust your muscle memory, to keep pulling even though your brain is screaming that you're about to fall. The physical structure of your ears is breaking down. The eardrum, that delicate membrane that vibrates with sound, can only take so much. Yours have probably perforated multiple times. Each perforation heals, usually, but the scar tissue makes them less flexible, less functional. The tiny bones in your middle ear, the malleus, incus, and stapes, though you don't know their names, are getting damaged too. These are the smallest bones in the human body, delicate as bird bones, and they're being subjected to sound waves powerful enough to shake stone walls. They're cracking, possibly fragmenting, definitely not doing their job properly anymore. Then there are the psychological effects. Historians still argue whether constant exposure to extreme noise causes purely physiological damage or whether there's a cognitive component, a kind of madness that sets in. The answer, you could tell them if they asked, is both. Definitely both. The constant noise, even when the bells aren't ringing. Remember that tinnitus never stops. Creates a baseline state of stress that your body never recovers from. Your cortisol levels, if anyone could measure them, are probably permanently elevated. You exist in a state of constant fight or flight, your nervous system amped up, alert, unable to relax. Sleep is a joke. Not just because you're woken every few hours for bell duty, but because your brain can't shut down properly. The phantom ringing continues through the night. Your dreams feature bells. You sometimes wake up panicking, certain you've missed a bell session, even though you haven't. The sleep deprivation compounds everything else, the hearing loss, the balance problems, the cognitive issues. You're operating in a fog, a permanent state of exhaustion that makes everything harder and more dangerous. Your ability to process speech is deteriorating in weird ways. Even when you can technically hear someone talking, or rather, when you can detect that sound is happening, your brain struggles to turn those sounds into words. The auditory processing centers are damaged. Someone will shout at you, and you'll hear noise, but parsing that noise into language takes several seconds of concentrated effort. Conversations feel like trying to solve puzzles while drunk and concussed, which is probably pretty close to your actual neurological state. The tower itself makes everything worse. Stone is an amazing acoustic material. It reflects and amplifies sound beautifully, which is why churches and cathedrals use it for bells in the first place. But this means you're not just dealing with the direct sound from the bell. You're dealing with that sound bouncing off every stone surface, reinforcing itself, creating standing waves and resonances that make the entire chamber a sound weapon. The frequency of the bell's ring matches certain resonant frequencies of the tower structure, which means the whole building vibrates. You can feel it in your teeth, in your chest, in your bones. Different bells create different damage patterns. The low-frequency bells, the big, deep-tone monsters, create vibrations that you feel more than hear. These low frequencies travel through your body, rattling your organs, your ribcage, maybe doing damage you won't understand for years. The high-frequency bells, smaller, higher-pitched, are like knives in your ears, sharp and penetrating. You've got a range of bells in your tower, which means you get the full spectrum of auditory destruction. There's a phenomenon that happens sometimes during ringing where the sound becomes almost unbearable, worse than usual. It happens when the bell's swing reaches a certain arc and the clapper strikes at precisely the right moment, creating a kind of acoustic perfect storm. The sound in these moments is physically painful. Not metaphorically painful, actually painful, like being stabbed in the ears. Your vision whites out. Your balance disappears. You've learned to recognize the approach of these moments by the rope's behavior, and you brace yourself, but bracing doesn't help much. The sound happens, it obliterates you, and then it passes, and you keep pulling because what else can you do? The other bell ringers, or former bell ringers, the ones who survived and moved on, are easy to identify even decades after they've left the towers. They all shout when they talk because they've lost the ability to gauge volume. They all have that glazed look, that 1,000-yard stare you see in soldiers, because they've experienced ongoing trauma that never really heals. They all lean in close when someone speaks, tilting their head to present their better ear, though neither ear is actually good. Some of them are completely deaf. Some of them are functionally deaf but can hear the bells in their nightmares. Here's a fun medieval medical fact. They sometimes tried to treat hearing problems with ear candles, which involved sticking a hollow candle in your ear and lighting it, supposedly to draw out wax and evil humors. This doesn't work. It's dangerous and stupid, but it's better than the alternative treatment, which involved pouring various substances into the ear, heated oil, urine, wine mixed with herbs, which also doesn't work and has a good chance of causing infection. You've wisely avoided all medical intervention because medieval medicine is more likely to kill you than whatever's wrong with you, and at least your current condition lets you keep working. The tower sways. This isn't your imagination or a symptom of your destroyed vestibular system. The tower actually physically sways. Tall stone structures have some flex to them. They have to, or they'd crack apart in wind. But when you're up in the bell chamber, especially during storms, you can feel the movement. The entire room shifts, inches back and forth, the stone groaning. And when the bells are ringing, when tons of bronze are swinging back and forth, the tower sways more. This motion, combined with your balance problems, creates a special kind of hell where you can't trust any of your senses. The floor is moving. Your inner ear says you're falling. Your eyes report one thing, your body reports another. And you're still supposed to keep pulling that rope with precise timing. You've started talking to yourself. Not because you're going mad, well, not only because you're going mad, but because you need to hear something other than the bells and the tinnitus. Your own voice, distorted and strange through your damaged hearing, is at least proof that other sounds exist. Sometimes you sing. You can't carry a tune anymore. You probably couldn't even if you weren't partially deaf. But the act of singing, of making sound deliberately, gives you some tiny measure of control in a situation where you control almost nothing. Other tower occupants have carved messages into the stone walls. You've found them during your climbs, scratched words in Latin or vernacular languages, dates, names, pleas to God, curses, statements of endurance. John was here, 1247. God preserve me from this noise. 3 years and counting. I can't hear anymore. These messages were left by people who had your job before you, people who experienced exactly what you're experiencing. Some of them presumably survived and moved on. Others almost certainly fell or jumped or died in place. You've added your own mark, a simple scratch that says nothing and everything. The damage is permanent. Even if you left today, even if you never heard another bell, your hearing wouldn't recover. The tinnitus wouldn't stop. The balance problems would persist. The psychological scars would remain. The bells have rewritten your nervous system, and there's no rewriting it back. You've got decades of this ahead of you, assuming you don't fall or go completely mad or develop one of the dozen other medical problems that plague bell ringers. By the time you're 40, if you make it to 40, you'll be profoundly deaf, probably dizzy, definitely damaged in ways that medieval society has no framework for understanding or accommodating. And then what? Who hires a deaf man who can't balance? What job exists for someone whose only skill is survive the bells? But you're not thinking about that now. Now you're pulling the rope for sext, the midday service, and the bell is swinging, and the sound is happening, and your ears are bleeding again, and the tower is swaying, and the tinnitus is screaming, and this is your life. The bells don't care that they're destroying you. They're bronze and ancient and holy. You're just the temporary human mechanism that makes them ring. At least you can still hear them. That's something, right? That has to be something. You're not alone up here. You wish you were, but you're absolutely not. The tower is teeming with life, just not human life, and not the kind of life you'd choose as roommates if you had any say in the matter. Right now, as you're trying to eat your meal of stale bread and questionable cheese, a pigeon is watching you from a rafter beam about 6 feet away. It's been watching you for 10 minutes. Its head is cocked at that unsettling angle pigeons use, one beady eye fixed on your food, and you absolutely know that the moment you look away it's going to dive bomb your meal and either steal it or contaminate it with droppings. Possibly both. Welcome to your roommates. Several thousand birds, a colony of bats that's probably in the hundreds, rats that consider the tower their ancestral homeland, insects you can't even identify, and various other creatures that have decided the stone structure is prime real estate. They were here before you. They'll be here after you. And they have zero respect for your personal space, your belongings, or your increasingly tenuous grip on sanity. Let's start with the pigeons because they're the most visible offenders. Medieval towers are pigeon paradise. Tall stone structures with plenty of ledges, openings to the outside, shelter from weather, and minimal predators. Your tower probably houses somewhere between 500 and 2,000 pigeons, depending on the season. They nest in every available crevice. The bell chamber has dozens of nests tucked into corners, behind beams, on ledges, in gaps in the stonework. Your sleeping area has nests. The stairwell has nests. There are nests in places you haven't even discovered yet, and you won't discover them until they become a problem, which they inevitably will. The noise alone is maddening. You'd think after the bells, bird sounds would be negligible, but remember your hearing is damaged in weird ways. You've lost sensitivity to some frequencies while others remain sharp. Pigeon cooing, it turns out, hits a frequency range you can still partially hear, which means you get to experience their constant vocalizations at all hours. They coo. They warble. They fight with each other in explosive wing-flapping battles that sound like someone shaking out wet laundry very aggressively. And they do all of this starting before dawn and continuing until well after dark. But the noise is nothing compared to the droppings. Let's talk about the droppings because this is where things get medieval-level disgusting. Pigeons produce a lot of waste. A single pigeon generates roughly 25 pounds of droppings per year. You've got at least 1,000 pigeons in this tower. That's 25,000 pounds of bird feces annually. That's over 12 tons. And it's got to go somewhere. That somewhere is everywhere. The floor of the bell chamber is covered in a layer of pigeon droppings that's inches deep in places. It's crusty when dry, slippery when wet, and releases clouds of dust when disturbed. Your sleeping area has a permanent accumulation that you try to sweep away, but it's like trying to hold back the tide. The stairs have droppings on every surface. This isn't just gross, it's dangerous. Pigeon droppings carry diseases that medieval medicine has no concept of. Histoplasmosis, cryptococcosis, psittacosis, you don't know these names, but your lungs are absolutely getting exposed to the fungal spores and bacteria that cause them. You've developed a persistent cough that never really goes away. Sometimes you cough up stuff you'd rather not examine too closely. Your chest feels tight. Breathing the air in this tower is like breathing in a biological weapon that's been aging for centuries. Because it has been. The accumulated droppings from decades of pigeons have created layers of compressed, desiccated waste that crumbles into dust with every footstep, and that dust is what you're breathing with every breath. The pigeons themselves are bold to the point of aggression. They're not afraid of you anymore. They've learned that you're just another fixture of the tower, and fixtures don't pose threats. They'll land on you while you're working. You've had pigeons perch on your shoulders while you're pulling bell ropes. They'll nest in your bedding if you don't check it constantly. One particularly audacious bird built a nest in the wool blanket you left folded on your sleeping mat, and you didn't discover this until you went to use the blanket and found eggs. You couldn't bring yourself to destroy the nest. Some combination of superstition and the fact that destroying life in a holy place seems like asking for divine punishment, so you just didn't use that blanket anymore. The pigeon raised her chicks right there in your quarters, and now those chicks are adults who think of you as furniture. Then there are the bats. The colony roosts in the uppermost parts of the tower, in the dark spaces between the roof timbers and the stone ceiling. During the day, they're mostly quiet, hanging upside down in dense clusters that look like some kind of organic ceiling decoration. But at dusk, they wake up. Hundreds of bats, all waking simultaneously, all starting to move and vocalize and prepare for their nightly hunting flights. The sound of hundreds of leathery wings unfurling is something between rustling paper and tearing fabric. Their vocalizations, the echolocation clicks and social calls, are mostly beyond your hearing range, but what you can hear is unsettling, a rapid chittering that sounds almost mechanical. The bats exit through the bell chamber openings in a stream, a living river of flying mammals that pours out into the twilight. This happens every evening, and every evening you try not to be in the bell chamber when it happens, because the bats don't particularly care if you're in their flight path. They'll navigate around you. Their echolocation is excellent. But the experience of having hundreds of bats swooping past your head in the semi-darkness is not conducive to mental stability. You've been hit a few times by bats who were apparently having an off day, and while they're small and don't really hurt, the feeling of a frantic bat tangled in your hair is something you'll never get used to. The rats are inevitable. Where there are birds, there are eggs. Where there are eggs, there are rats. Your tower has a thriving rat population that feeds on pigeon eggs, chicks, and the grain that pigeons sometimes bring in with them. These aren't small, timid mice. These are proper medieval rats, big and bold and entirely comfortable with human presence. You've woken up more than once to find a rat walking across your chest. Just walking, not even hurrying, as if you're a convenient bridge between one side of the room and the other. The rats nest in the walls, in gaps in the stonework, under the wooden platforms, and basically anywhere you're not actively occupying at that exact moment. You hear them constantly scratching, squeaking, fighting with each other. They're louder than the pigeons in some ways because while pigeons make noise, rats make impact noise. They knock things over. They chew on wood with their constantly growing teeth. And the sound of rat teeth on wood is exactly as horrible as you'd imagine. They've chewed through some of your belongings, not many, because you don't have many belongings, but the few you have are fair game. The rats also carry fleas, and those fleas carry diseases, including the plague, which sweeps through Europe every few decades and kills somewhere between a third and half of the population. You're living in intimate proximity with one of the plague's primary vectors, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can't rat-proof a medieval tower. The structure is too complex, too full of gaps and holes and spaces. The rats have 1,000 ways in and out. You're just another occupant of their territory, and not a particularly important one. Then there are the insects. Oh, the insects. The tower is a haven for every kind of bug that appreciates stone structures. Spiders? Huge ones? They feast on the abundant flying insects. Beetles, moths, flies in the warmer months, and various crawling things you can't identify and don't want to. The spiders are actually helpful. They eat other insects, but they're also everywhere, and their webs accumulate in corners and across openings, and you regularly walk face first into webs in the dark, which never stops being horrifying. The flies are seasonal but intense. In summer, when the heat combines with the accumulated bird and bat droppings, the tower becomes fly heaven. They breed in the guano. They swarm in clouds. They land on your food, on your face, on every surface. You've learned to eat quickly, before the flies can really establish themselves on your meal, and you've become skilled at eating while continuously waving one hand to keep the flies at bay. It doesn't really work, but it's better than nothing. Historians still argue whether medieval people had different standards of cleanliness or just different opportunities for cleanliness. The answer, you know from experience, is both. You'd love to be cleaner. You'd love to sleep somewhere that isn't covered in bird droppings. But there's nowhere else to sleep, and even if you cleaned your sleeping area perfectly, which you can't because new droppings appear constantly, it would just get dirty again immediately. You've adapted to a baseline level of filth that would horrify anyone from a later century. But this is just reality. This is the deal. The pigeons and bats also bring in parasites. Mites, lice, ticks. They all live on the birds and bats, and they're perfectly happy to experiment with living on you too. You've got bites constantly. Some itch, some hurt, some swell up into painful lumps. Medieval medicine's solution to parasites is basically try not to have them, which is spectacularly unhelpful when you're living in a parasite resort. You've tried various folk remedies, washing with strong-smelling herbs, wearing certain plants that supposedly repel insects, but nothing really works. The bugs are winning. They've always been winning. Your belongings are constantly being destroyed or contaminated. That blanket with the pigeon nest isn't an isolated incident. Birds nest in anything soft. Rats chew anything that seems potentially edible, and their definition of potentially edible is broad. Your spare shoes, well, you don't have spare shoes, but if you did, they'd be full of bird nest materials within a week. The rope you use for various tasks gets weakened by rats gnawing on it. The wooden surfaces develop holes from insect larvae. The smell is its own issue. Thousands of animals living in close quarters create a funk that's hard to describe. It's not just one smell. It's a combination of bird droppings, bat guano, rat musk, decomposing nest materials, dead birds and rats in various states of decay, and the general mustiness of a stone building that never fully dries out. This smell has permeated everything. Your clothes smell like it. Your hair smells like it. Your skin smells like it. You've stopped noticing because you're nose blind to it now. But when the priest comes up to check on something, you can see him trying not to react to the smell. You've become the smelly tower guy, and there's no amount of washing in the cold water you haul up occasionally that will fix this. The animals also create practical dangers beyond disease. Pigeon nests are fire hazards. They're made of straw and twigs and other flammable materials, and they're everywhere, including near candles if you're foolish enough to bring candles up here. A single spark could turn the entire tower into a chimney. Bat guano is also flammable once it dries and accumulates in sufficient quantities. You're living in a tinderbox that's also a disease incubator, that's also a wildlife sanctuary. And yet, perversely, the animals are also your only company. You talk to the pigeons sometimes. They don't answer, but they coo back, which is something. You've named some of the more distinctive ones. There's a pigeon with a twisted foot that you call Hop, a pure white one you call Ghost, a particularly aggressive male you call Bastard. These names give you something, some way to impose order on the chaos, some reminder that you're still capable of humor even in this situation. The bats are anonymous, they all look the same, and they're mostly active when you're not. But their evening exodus has become a kind of time marker, a natural clock that tells you dusk has arrived. The rats are enemies, but even enemies are relationships. You've declared war on one particular rat that keeps stealing your food, and this ongoing battle gives you something to think about besides the bells and the cold and the isolation. Sometimes you wonder what it would be like to live somewhere without animals, somewhere clean and dry and quiet. Then you remember that you're never leaving this tower, so there's no point wondering. The animals are permanent. They were here first. They'll be here last. You finish your bread, having lost half of it to pigeons while you were lost in thought. Bastard the pigeon is eyeing the last piece. You eat it quickly, crumbs falling onto the guano-crusted floor where they'll feed the rats who'll feed the fleas who'll eventually feed on you. It's an ecosystem. You're just another part of it. A diseased, coughing, vermin-covered part of it. The wind is trying to kill you. Not metaphorically, not eventually, right now, actively, with what feels like personal malice. You're in the bell chamber for Vespers, and a late autumn storm has rolled in with the kind of fury that makes you understand why medieval people thought God was constantly angry. The wind is screaming through the open arches at speeds that make your eyes water, and it's not just blowing, it's gusting, which means it hits in waves, each one strong enough to physically move you if you're not braced. You're gripping the bell rope with white knuckles, not because you're pulling it, but because you need something to hold onto that's anchored to several tons of bronze. The rope is the only thing between you and a sudden flight through one of those lovely unglazed window openings. Medieval towers weren't designed with occupant comfort in mind. They were designed to be tall, imposing, defensible, and loud. Weatherproof wasn't on the requirements list. Those 4 large, arched openings in each bell chamber, the ones that let the bell sound carry for miles, also let in every bit of weather that happens to be occurring. Rain, snow, sleet, hail, wind, all of it comes straight in. And you're standing here multiple times per day, in whatever weather the universe decides to throw at you. The wind is the most immediate threat. These towers are tall, yours is around 200 feet, remember, which means you're exposed to wind speeds significantly higher than ground level. Basic physics. Wind speed increases with altitude because there's less friction from ground-level obstacles. At 200 feet, you're getting wind that's 30 to 40% stronger than what people on the ground experience. When they're dealing with a breezy day down there, you're dealing with gale-force winds up here. When they're dealing with a storm, you're dealing with a hurricane. The gusts are unpredictable, which makes them terrifying. The wind will be steady for a few seconds, then suddenly slam into you from a different direction with twice the force. You've learned to read the sound. The pitch of wind screaming through stone openings changes just before a gust hits, but that only gives you about 1 second of warning. 1 second to brace, to grab something, to get low if possible. Usually it's not possible because you're in the middle of pulling a rope that requires your full body weight and coordination, and you can't just stop because wind happens. You've been blown off your feet exactly once. It was during a winter storm, winds that the people on the ground probably experienced as very strong. And up here felt like the hand of God trying to physically remove you from his tower. A gust hit from the side while you were moving between the rope and the wooden platform edge, caught you mid-step with nothing to hold onto, and threw you sideways. You managed to collapse and grab a floor beam as you were sliding toward one of the openings. You laid there, flat on the wooden platform, arms wrapped around that beam, while the wind howled over you for what felt like hours but was probably minutes. When the gust finally weakened, you crawled on hands and knees, back to the rope and finished ringing the bell because the schedule waits for no one, not even near-death experiences. The tower sways in high winds. We mentioned this before, but it's worth repeating because the sensation is uniquely awful. The entire structure moves, oscillating back and forth with a period of several seconds. The movement is slow enough that your eyes don't immediately register it, but your inner ear, already destroyed by the bells, absolutely registers it, and the combination of visual stability and vestibular movement input creates violent nausea. You've vomited during storms more times than you can count, just bent over and retched while holding the rope, because what else can you do? The bells must ring. Your stomach's opinions on the matter are irrelevant. Rain is its own nightmare. The rain doesn't politely stay outside. It comes in through the arches at approximately 45-degree angles, driven by wind, and soaks everything. The wooden platform becomes slippery. The rope becomes slippery. Your hands, already dealing with calluses and splits and rope burn, now have to grip wet rope, which is both harder to hold and more likely to cause injuries. The rain is cold, especially in autumn and winter, and you're getting soaked to the skin while standing in wind that's rapidly evaporating that water and stealing your body heat in the process. Hypothermia is a real risk, though you don't know that word. You just know that sometimes, during long winter storms, you start shaking uncontrollably and can't stop. Your thinking gets fuzzy. Your fingers stop working properly, which is fantastic when you're trying to grip a rope that's controlling thousands of pounds of swinging metal. You've learned to recognize the early signs, the shivering, the confusion, the desire to just lie down and rest. And you've learned that the only solution is to keep moving, keep working, generate body heat through activity. But the bell ringing itself isn't enough. Between sessions, during those brief rest periods, you have to pace in your quarters, do physical exercises, anything to keep your core temperature from dropping too far. Lightning is terror in its purest form. You're standing in the tallest structure for miles, made of stone and metal, and you're literally holding a rope that's connected to a massive bronze bell. You are connected to a lightning rod. Medieval people understood that tall structures attracted lightning. They weren't stupid, but understanding something and being able to do anything about it are very different things. Lightning rods won't be invented for another 500 years. Your only defense is prayer and luck, and neither seems particularly effective. You've witnessed 3 lightning strikes on your tower during storms. The first one hit somewhere below the bell chamber. The entire structure shook. There was a flash that blinded you, a sound that was somehow even worse than the bells, and a smell like burning stone. You weren't touching the rope at that exact moment, which probably saved your life. The second strike hit one of the iron reinforcing bands around a window opening, and you swear you saw electricity, though you don't have that word, arcing between metal fixtures. The third strike is still giving you nightmares. It hit during a bell-ringing session. You were holding the rope. The discharge went through the bell, through the rope, through you, and into the ground. It didn't kill you, obviously, but it should have. You remember the impact, the way every muscle in your body seized simultaneously, the taste of metal, and then nothing. You woke up on the platform, rope still in your hands. No idea how much time had passed, and somehow the bell had continued ringing without you, because momentum is a powerful force. After that strike, your left arm didn't work properly for a week. You kept ringing bells with one arm, because again, the schedule doesn't care about your medical emergencies. The arm eventually recovered, mostly, but you've got a scar now. A fractal pattern burned into the skin from shoulder to wrist, a Lichtenberg figure that marks you forever as someone who survived lightning. The other bell ringers, when you eventually meet them at the annual gathering of tower keepers, will see the scar and know exactly what happened. It's a badge of honor in a profession where death is common and survival is notable. Winter brings snow and ice, which create their own special problems. Snow blows in through the openings and accumulates on the wooden platform, making it slippery. Ice forms on the rope, making it rigid and even more abrasive. Ice forms on the bell mechanism, adding weight and changing the way everything moves, which throws off your timing and increases the risk of mechanical failure. The metal fixtures, the axle, the clapper, the mounting hardware, contract in the cold, and metal contracting means joints loosening, parts shifting, tolerances changing. Things that worked fine in summer become dangerous in winter. The cold itself is brutal. Stone is an excellent conductor of cold. It absorbs the chill from outside air and radiates it inward. The bell chamber is essentially a stone box open on 4 sides to winter weather, and you're standing in the middle of it, exposed, multiple times per day. Your clothing is inadequate. Everyone's clothing is inadequate in medieval times. They simply don't have the materials or technology for proper insulation. You're wearing wool, which is the best available option, but wool only works when it's dry. Wet wool is heavy, cold, and basically useless. And your wool is frequently wet because of the rain and snow that blow in constantly. Frostbite is another word you don't know, but you know the reality. Fingers and toes that hurt, then stop hurting, then turn white, then turn black, then fall off. You've lost 2 toes already, both on your left foot, casualties of a particularly brutal winter storm series when you couldn't keep your extremities warm. The toes turned black over the course of a week, became obviously dead, and eventually just detached. Medieval medical theory says this happened because your humors were out of balance or because God was testing you. The actual reason is that the tissue froze, the cells died, and gangrene set in. You're lucky it didn't spread. Many bell ringers have lost more than toes. Your fingers are at constant risk. You need your fingers for the rope, so you can't protect them the way you'd like. Mittens would be safer than nothing, but you can't grip rope properly in mittens. Your hands are bare, exposed to cold and wet and wind, and they're covered in splits and cracks and chilblains. Painful, itchy swellings caused by repeated exposure to cold. The chilblains itch so badly that you've drawn blood scratching them, and of course those scratches get infected, and those infections don't heal because you can't keep your hands clean or dry or rested. Summer brings opposite problems. The stone that trapped cold in winter traps heat in summer. The bell chamber becomes an oven, not a metaphorical oven, an actual oven, stone heated by sun radiating that heat inward, temperatures that climb well above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And you're doing hard physical labor in this heat, pulling heavy ropes, generating your own body heat, wearing wool clothing because that's all you have. Heat exhaustion is common. Heat stroke is a real risk. Dehydration happens faster than you'd expect. You're sweating constantly, and that sweat is taking water and salt from your body faster than you can replace them. Water has to be hauled up those 300 steps, remember, and you can only carry so much, and it's never enough. You've learned to ration, taking small sips, making the water last. But rationing means chronic mild dehydration, which means headaches, dizziness, weakness, and poor decision-making. All wonderful conditions to experience while operating heavy machinery suspended in the air. The summer storms are violent in different ways than winter storms. Thunder and lightning, yes, but also sudden, intense downpours that cool nothing and just add humidity to the existing heat. The bell chamber fills with mist, thick and disorienting. Visibility drops to nothing. You're pulling the rope blind, navigating by feel, hoping you don't step wrong or grab wrong or make any of the 1,000 mistakes that could kill you. Historians still argue whether medieval people experienced weather differently than modern people, or whether they just had fewer options for avoiding it. You can answer that definitively. The weather is exactly as dangerous and miserable as it's always been, but medieval people, especially people like you in exposed positions, just had to endure it. There's no going inside when you live inside a structure that's effectively outside. There's no heating or air conditioning or weatherproofing. There's just stone and wood and your increasingly damaged body, standing between the weather and the duty. The seasonal transitions are weirdly the worst. Spring and autumn bring rapidly changing conditions, warm days and freezing nights, or vice versa. Your body never fully adapts because the conditions keep changing. You're too hot, then too cold, then too hot again, all in the span of a few hours. The temperature swings aggravate your damaged respiratory system. You're coughing more during seasonal transitions, bringing up more of that concerning stuff from your lungs, feeling that tightness in your chest getting tighter. Fog is disorienting. Dense fog rolls in, especially in autumn, and suddenly you can't see anything beyond a few feet. The ground disappears. The sky disappears. You exist in a gray void. Sounds muffled. No visual references. Your already compromised balance system has nothing to work with. Ringing bells in fog feels like existing in a strange purgatory. Just you and the rope and the sound and the gray nothing all around. The weather is unrelenting. It never stops. There's always something. Wind, rain, cold, heat, lightning, snow, fog. Always some atmospheric condition trying to make your job harder or kill you. The bell schedule doesn't pause for weather. Dangerous storm? Ring the bells. Blizzard? Ring the bells. Heat wave? Ring the bells. Lightning actively striking the tower? Ring the bells. You've developed a kind of fatalism about it. The weather will do what it does. You'll endure it or you won't. The bells must ring. Everything else, comfort, safety, survival, is secondary to that simple fact. Right now the wind is still howling, you're still gripping the rope, and Vespers still needs ringing. Your hands are numb. Your face is wet. Rain or tears or both, hard to tell, doesn't matter. The bell swings. The sound happens. The weather continues. This is your life, exposed to the elements, until the elements or something else finally wins. The rope snaps. Not the one you're holding, that would be too quick, too merciful. No, this is one of the support ropes, a secondary line that helps stabilize the bell frame, and it parts with a sound like a whip crack. The sudden redistribution of forces makes the entire mechanism lurch sideways, the wooden frame groaning in a way that should not groan, and the bell, thousands of pounds of it, swings in a direction it was never designed to swing. You have exactly 1 second to process what's happening, and in that second, you make the calculation that's kept you alive this long. Let go of everything and drop flat. The bell swings past where your head was a moment ago, close enough that you feel the wind of its passage, close enough that if you'd hesitated even a fraction of a second, your skull would be pulp and the church would be shopping for bell ringer number whatever you are in the sequence. You stay flat on the wooden platform, heart hammering, while the bell continues its chaotic swing, the broken rope dangling uselessly, the wooden frame making sounds that promise imminent catastrophic failure. Welcome to the mechanical nightmare that is medieval bell ringing. You're not just pulling a rope attached to a bell. You're operating a complex system of counterweights, levers, pivots, and friction points, all made of materials that decay, all under constant stress, all maintained by exactly nobody because tower maintenance budgets are essentially whatever's left over after we pay for everything else, which is usually nothing. Let's break down this death trap you're operating. The bell itself is bronze, a copper-tin alloy, cast in one piece, usually by a traveling bell founder who set up a temporary foundry near the church. Your bell was probably cast around 1180, which makes it about 130 years old at this point. Bronze is durable, yes, but it's not indestructible. It develops cracks, especially where the clapper strikes repeatedly in the same spot. A cracked bell can shatter during ringing, sending bronze fragments flying like shrapnel. This has happened. Bell ringers have died this way, killed by their own bell exploding from metal fatigue. The bell hangs from a wooden headstock, a massive beam that's mounted on an axle, allowing the bell to swing. This headstock is oak, probably, because oak is strong and was readily available in medieval Europe. But oak also rots, especially when exposed to moisture, which your bell chamber has in abundance. The headstock on your bell is the same age as the bell, 130 years of weathering and stress and slow decay. It's been weakened by water damage, by insect activity, by the constant flexing forces of the bell's weight. You can see splits in the wood, gaps that probably weren't there originally, places where the grain has separated. The axle, the pivot point that the headstock rotates on, is iron. Iron rusts. Your axle has rust on it, definitely, and rust is essentially iron being converted into iron oxide, which is weaker and more brittle than iron. The axle is under constant shear stress every time the bell swings. Eventually, maybe today, maybe next year, that axle will fail. When it fails, several tons of bronze will drop straight down through the rotten wooden platform you're standing on, and everyone involved will have a very bad day that ends very quickly. The bearings that allow the axle to rotate smoothly are simply wood-on-metal contact points, maybe with some animal fat rubbed on them for lubrication. This is not sophisticated engineering. There are no ball bearings, no precision machine surfaces, no modern lubricants, just wood pressing against metal, wearing away slowly, increasing friction, making the bell harder to ring and more likely to bind up at exactly the wrong moment. The rope you're pulling is hemp, the same material used for ship's rigging and basically every other application requiring strong rope in medieval times. Hemp is excellent, strong, relatively flexible, resistant to rot. But hemp ropes wear out. The fibers break down from friction, from moisture cycles, from UV exposure through those open arches, from the constant stress of supporting and moving the bell's weight. Your rope has been in service for maybe 2 years, which is pushing the safe lifespan. You can see individual fibers starting to fray, especially where the rope passes through the guide holes. But replacing the rope requires taking the entire bell mechanism offline, requires materials and labor that cost money nobody wants to spend, requires someone who knows how to properly rig a bell. so you keep using the fraying rope and hoping. The rope guide, a wooden or metal fixture that keeps the rope aligned properly, is worn smooth in the channel where the rope runs. This smooth channel means the rope can slip, can catch, can behave unpredictably. You've learned to account for this in your technique, but accounting for unpredictable rope behavior while managing thousands of pounds of moving metal is like juggling knives while blindfolded. Eventually your luck runs out. There are multiple ropes in a bell system. The main rope you pull, yes, but also stay ropes that limit the bell swing, guide ropes that help control direction, and safety ropes that are supposed to catch the bell if something fails. Supposed to is doing heavy lifting in that sentence because the safety systems are only as good as their weakest component, and every component is old and stressed and decaying. That support rope that just snapped? It was a safety feature. Now it's a failure point. The wooden platform you're standing on deserves special attention, because it's the only thing between you and a 200-foot drop. This platform is made of oak planks, probably 4 to 6 inches thick, laid across supporting beams that are themselves supported by the tower's stone structure. The platform is the same age as everything else, 130-ish years, and it's experienced every weather condition the local climate can produce. The wood has expanded and contracted with temperature and humidity changes thousands of times. It's been soaked by rain, dried by sun, frozen in winter, baked in summer. Some planks have visible cracks. Some feel spongy when you step on them, a sure sign that rot has started inside the wood. The load calculations for this platform were done by medieval carpenters using medieval math, which is to say, they guessed. They built it thick enough that it seemed safe, and if it held up, great. If it didn't, well, that bell ringer should have prayed harder. The platform is holding the weight of you, the bell frame, the bell itself, easily over a ton, and all the associated hardware. The static load is probably within the platform's capacity. The dynamic loads, the forces generated when the bell swings, the vibrations, the shock loads when the clapper strikes, are much harder to predict and much more likely to cause failure. You've learned to read the platform's condition through subtle cues. Certain planks creak in certain ways when they're about to fail. The platform flexes differently when beams are weakening. There's a spot near the northwest corner that you simply don't stand on anymore because that plank is definitely going to fail soon, and you'd prefer not to be on it when it does. You've reported this to the church authorities multiple times. They've acknowledged your concern. Nothing has been done. Nothing will be done until either the plank fails and you die, or you die of something else first. The clapper, the internal hammer that actually strikes the bell to produce sound, is a heavy iron cylinder suspended from the bell's crown by a leather strap or sometimes an iron link. The clapper is designed to swing freely inside the bell, striking the sound bow, the thick part of the bell designed to be struck, at the right point in the swing cycle. But the clapper system fails in interesting ways. The leather strap can break, sending the clapper flying. The iron link can crack. The clapper itself can break. Cast iron is brittle and subject to metal fatigue. If the clapper breaks or detaches during ringing, you've suddenly got a massive metal projectile loose inside a swinging bell, and the results are unpredictable and usually fatal. There are bolts and brackets holding everything together, iron hardware that connects the wooden components, anchors the system to the stone tower, keeps the forces distributed properly. Every one of these connection points is a potential failure point. Iron corrodes. Wood shrinks and splits. Bolts work loose from vibration. Medieval metallurgy produced iron with inconsistent quality. Some bolts are fine, some have inclusions and flaws that make them weak. You can't tell by looking which is which. You just operate the system and hope. Historians still argue whether medieval engineers understood the forces involved in bell ringing or whether they just built things heavy and hoped for the best. The answer seems to be mostly the latter. They understood empirically that thick timbers were stronger than thin ones, that bigger bolts held better than smaller ones, that some configurations worked and others didn't. But the mathematical understanding of dynamic loads, fatigue failure, and material properties was centuries away. They were building systems that would experience millions of stress cycles over decades, using rules of thumb and tradition rather than calculation. The maintenance situation is darkly comedic. In theory, the church is responsible for maintaining the bells and their mechanisms. In practice, this means that once every few years, someone might climb up here, look around, declare everything seems fine, and leave. Actual repairs happen only after catastrophic failures, because that's when the problem becomes visible to people on the ground. Your rope frayed and then snapped and sent the bell crashing through the platform and maybe killed you? Well, now we should probably fix that. Maybe, if there's money, which there isn't. You've tried doing maintenance yourself, but your capabilities are limited. You can replace the rope if someone provides rope, but proper rope rigging requires skills you don't have. You can clean and lubricate the bearings, but you can't replace the axle. You can inspect for obvious damage, but you can't assess internal cracks in metal or wood. You're essentially running a complex, dangerous machine with zero training and minimal support. And the machine is held together by wood that's older than your grandfather and metal that's slowly turning into rust. The bell frame itself, the structural support that holds everything, is experiencing forces that would frighten a modern structural engineer. When the bell swings, it generates enormous lateral loads. The frame has to resist these loads while also allowing the bell to move freely. The joints where frame members connect are traditional mortise and tenon joints, pegged with wooden dowels. These joints work through friction and mechanical interlocking, but the constant vibration loosens them over time. The dowels wear, the mortises elongate, the joints develop play, allowing movement that shouldn't exist, creating new stress patterns that the structure wasn't designed for. You can feel the frame shifting during ringing. It shouldn't shift, it should be rigid. But it does shift, moving perceptibly with each swing of the bell. This movement means something is loose, something has failed, something is wrong. But stopping the bell for repairs means the bells don't ring, and unrung bells mean the monastery schedule is disrupted, and that's unacceptable. So you keep ringing, and the frame keeps shifting, and eventually something will give. The acoustic properties of the bell chamber amplify everything, including sounds that warn of impending failure. You've learned to hear the difference between normal creaks and dangerous creaks. Normal creaks are steady, predictable, the sound of wood flexing under load and returning. Dangerous creaks are sharp, sudden, changing in pitch, accompanied by other sounds like splintering or tearing. When you hear dangerous creaks, you're supposed to stop immediately and investigate. But often the dangerous creaks happen mid-ring, when stopping isn't really an option, so you just keep going and pray. The rope that just snapped is now dangling uselessly, and you need to either remove it or secure it because a loose rope in a bell chamber is a hazard. It can get wrapped around the main rope, can catch on moving parts, can trip you during future sessions. But dealing with it requires climbing up into the bell frame, among all those swinging, moving, stressed components, to cut or tie off the broken rope. This is terrifyingly dangerous work, and you'll have to do it before the next ringing session, which means you have maybe 2 hours. You slowly stand up, checking your body for injury. Nothing broken, somehow. The bell has stopped swinging now, its momentum dissipated. The wooden frame is still groaning softly, settling back into its rest position. You approach carefully and examine the damage. The support rope, thick as your thumb, has parted cleanly at a point where it ran through a metal guide. The metal has worn a groove in the rope over years of friction, and finally the remaining fibers couldn't hold. The rope's other end is still attached to the frame, whipping slightly in the wind coming through the arches. You're going to have to climb up there onto the swinging frame and secure that rope. There's no alternative. Leaving it is too dangerous. And so you begin the climb, moving carefully, testing each handhold, acutely aware that if any other component fails while you're up here, there's nowhere to go but down. The mechanisms don't care about your fear. They're wood and metal and rope, operating according to physics, failing according to age and stress. You're just the human component, temporarily required, easily replaced. The maintenance log, if anyone kept one, would read, support rope failed, bell ringer survived, repairs needed, no repairs budgeted, continue operations. And so you will, because the bells must ring. You haven't had fresh water in 3 days. The bucket you hauled up last week still has about 2 inches of liquid in the bottom, but calling it water at this point is generous. It's brown, has a film on the surface, and contains the bodies of at least 3 drowned insects. You're going to drink it anyway because the alternative is not drinking, and not drinking means dying faster than you're already dying. You fish out the visible bugs. There are certainly more that aren't visible, and take a careful sip. tastes like stone and algae and regret. Welcome to the logistical nightmare that is sustaining human life in a medieval bell tower. Let's start with water, because water is life, and you're not getting nearly enough of it. The nearest water source is on the ground, 200 feet below and several hundred yards away. Either a well in the monastery courtyard or a stream beyond the church grounds. Water is heavy. A gallon weighs about 8 pounds. To stay properly hydrated, especially doing the physical labor you're doing, you need at least a gallon per day, probably more. That means hauling 8 pounds of water up 300 steps every single day, in addition to everything else you have to carry. Except you can't carry water in your hands. You need a container. Your container is a wooden bucket, and wooden buckets leak. Not catastrophically. If they leaked catastrophically, they'd be useless. But they leak slowly, seeping water through the gaps between staves, leaving a trail of drips on your climb up. By the time you reach the top, you've lost maybe 10% of the water. If you're trying to carry a bucket in each hand, you've got the weight plus the awkwardness plus the death trap stairs. You've fallen twice while carrying water. Both times you dropped the buckets to catch yourself. Both times you spent the next hours thirsty, knowing you didn't have the energy to make another water run that day. So you underhydrate chronically. You drink less than you need because getting water is such an ordeal. This means you're functioning in a constant state of mild dehydration, which contributes to the headaches, the dizziness, the poor decision-making, the susceptibility to heat illness in summer. Your urine is dark amber, always a sign that your kidneys are working overtime to conserve water. You've probably got kidney stones forming, though that's a problem for future you. Present you just knows that sometimes urinating hurts in ways it shouldn't, and medieval medicine's answer to that is either drink more water, impossible, or it's a demon, unhelpful. Water storage is its own problem. You've got the bucket, but wooden buckets sitting still for days grow algae. The water turns green, develops a taste, becomes home to larvae and other things you'd prefer not to contemplate. You've tried covering the bucket. There's a wooden board you place on top, but this doesn't seal it, so dust and bird droppings and insects still get in. You've considered boiling the water, but that requires fire, which requires firewood, which requires hauling firewood up 300 steps, and we'll get to that nightmare in a moment. Food is worse than water. Your diet consists almost entirely of bread, hard, dark, coarse bread that's made from whatever grain the monastery has in surplus, which is usually the cheapest, lowest quality grain available. This bread is baked in large batches and is already several days old by the time you get it. They give you a loaf, maybe two, once a week. You're supposed to make it last. It doesn't last because you're burning enormous calories ringing bells and climbing stairs and trying not to freeze to death. The bread goes stale within a day in the dry tower air. Stale is fine, you can still eat stale bread, though it requires extensive chewing and preferably something to drink with it. But stale progresses to hard, which progresses to could be used as a weapon, which progresses to moldy. The mold appears as green or white fuzzy spots, and medieval food preservation knowledge says you can just cut off the moldy parts and eat the rest. You do this. You're eating mold-adjacent bread regularly. The mold that's visible is just the surface growth. The fungal filaments have penetrated throughout the loaf. You're ingesting mycotoxins with every meal, and while most of them probably won't kill you immediately, they're not doing your already compromised health any favors. Sometimes they send up cheese. Medieval cheese is not refrigerated. Refrigeration won't be invented for centuries. It's just aged in cool, dark places until it's hard enough and salty enough to resist immediate spoilage. The cheese you get is rock hard, intensely salty, and often home to cheese mites, tiny little arachnids that live in aged cheese. You eat them. Everyone eats them. It's protein. Probably. The cheese mites are actually the least of your problems with the cheese, which is so salty it makes your chronic dehydration worse. But salt is a preservative and preserved food is what you get. Occasionally, very occasionally, there's dried fish or salted meat. This is a luxury, reserved for feast days, or when someone remembers that the bell ringer is technically entitled to food. The fish is dried so thoroughly it's basically fish-shaped wood. You have to soak it in your precious water to rehydrate it enough to chew. The salted meat is similar, hard, desiccated, requiring serious jaw work to consume. Both are so salty that eating them makes you desperately thirsty, which circles back to the water problem. Fresh food doesn't exist in your world. Fresh vegetables, fresh fruit, fresh meat, these are not things you see. Even if someone wanted to send fresh produce up to you, it would spoil in days without refrigeration. In summer, fresh fruit would rot in the heat. In winter, it would freeze. There's no way to store it, no way to preserve it. Your diet is chronically deficient in vitamins, particularly vitamin C. You're probably developing scurvy, though you don't know what scurvy is. You just know that your gums bleed, your teeth are getting loose, you bruise easily, and old wounds don't heal properly. These are all symptoms of vitamin C deficiency, and they're getting worse. Preparing food, such as food preparation exists, is a challenge. You have no kitchen. You have no stove. You have no running water, no countertops, no utensils beyond a knife you carry, and maybe a wooden bowl. If you want to eat, you tear bread with your hands and chew it. That's the extent of food preparation. Sometimes you dip the bread in water to soften it, creating a soggy, unappetizing mush that's at least chewable. Fire would solve multiple problems. With fire, you could boil water, making it safer to drink. You could cook food, making it more palatable and easier to digest. You could heat your quarters in winter. But fire in a wooden bell tower is existential risk. One stray spark, one gust of wind carrying an ember into dry wood or old straw from bird nests, and the entire tower becomes a chimney. Tower fires were real and relatively common in medieval times. There are records of bells being destroyed, tower keepers killed, sometimes entire churches burned because a fire started in the tower. So no fire, which means no cooked food, no boiled water, no heat source. You eat cold food in a cold room and drink questionable water and hope your medieval immune system can handle whatever pathogens you're ingesting. The logistics of waste disposal are exactly as horrible as you're imagining. You're living 200 feet in the air. You need to urinate and defecate because that's what living humans do. Your options are: go down 300 steps every time nature calls, which is impractical and exhausting, or handle waste in the tower. You've chosen option 2 because you have to. You have a bucket, a different bucket from the water bucket. You're not a complete animal. That serves as your toilet. It's a wooden bucket, and it's exactly as pleasant as a wooden bucket full of human waste in an enclosed space can be, which is to say, not pleasant at all. The smell is indescribable. You've gotten used to it mostly, but getting used to it really means your nose has given up trying to warn you about the olfactory assault. The bucket fills. When it fills, you have to carry it down 300 steps and empty it. Carrying a bucket full of liquid waste down a narrow spiral staircase in darkness while the contents slosh and threaten to spill is one of the circles of hell Dante forgot to include. You've spilled. Of course you've spilled. There are steps on that staircase that are permanently stained, and those stains are your contribution to the tower's history. Historians still argue whether medieval people had different sanitation standards or just different options for meeting those standards. You can confirm it's the latter. You'd love a proper privy, a garderobe chute that goes straight down to ground level or into a cesspit. Some towers have these. Yours doesn't. You're stuck with the bucket. Sometimes, when you're truly desperate and it's dark and no one can see, you just dump the waste out one of the bell chamber openings. It falls 200 feet and splatters on the ground below, or, if you're unlucky and the wind is wrong, on the tower walls where it freezes in winter and bakes in summer, creating lovely streaks that tell everyone exactly what's happening up here. The church authorities have spoken to you about this. They've asked you to please use the bucket and carry it down properly. You've agreed, but when it's midnight and freezing and you need to go, practicality trumps propriety. Bathing doesn't happen. Not really. A proper bath would require heating large quantities of water, and we've established that fire isn't happening and hauling water is already a nightmare. You occasionally do a kind of sponge bath situation, using a small amount of water and a rag to clean the parts of your body that smell worst. This is inefficient and unsatisfying. You smell. You know you smell. Everyone knows you smell. This is just how tower keepers smell. It's part of the job description that wasn't mentioned during hiring. Your clothes never get properly clean. You wash them occasionally by dunking them in water, maybe in the bucket, maybe in a stream if you're on the ground, and then hanging them to dry. But without soap, soap is expensive and you're poor, and without hot water, and without the ability to properly scrub and rinse, you're really just redistributing the dirt and sweat rather than removing it. The clothes develop a permanent funk, a lived-in smell that no amount of medieval washing can eliminate. The wool absorbs everything: sweat, smoke smell from the church incense drifting up the general tower miasma and holds it forever. Food storage attracts vermin. Your bread and cheese are attractive to rats and mice and insects. You've tried wrapping food in cloth, storing it in a wooden box, hanging it from ropes to keep it away from climbing rodents. None of this works perfectly. The rats are persistent and clever. They chew through cloth. They climb ropes. They can smell food through containers. You've woken up more than once to find rats actively gnawing on your food stores. Sometimes you chase them away. Sometimes you're too tired and just let them have some, figuring they'll take it anyway if you don't share. The shared space with animals means your food is constantly being contaminated. Bird droppings fall from above and land on your food if it's not covered. Insects crawl on everything. The layer of dust in the tower, composed of stone dust, dried bird droppings, decomposed organic matter, settles on all surfaces, including your food. You're eating contaminated food with every meal, ingesting bacteria and parasites and who knows what else. Malnutrition is your constant companion. The bread-heavy diet lacks protein, fats, vitamins, minerals, basically everything except calories. Your body is eating itself slowly, breaking down muscle tissue to get the amino acids it needs, leaching calcium from your bones, struggling to maintain basic functions. Your hair is falling out in patches. Your nails are brittle and ridged. Your skin is developing strange patches and sores that don't heal. These are all signs of nutritional deficiencies, but medieval medicine doesn't understand nutrition. They just think you're sick, or cursed, or that your humors need balancing. The physical energy required for your job is immense, but the calories available are insufficient. You're burning maybe 3,000 to 4,000 calories per day with all the climbing and bell ringing and just trying to stay warm. You're probably consuming 1,500 to 2,000 calories, mostly from bread. This caloric deficit means you're losing weight steadily, becoming weaker, more susceptible to illness and injury. Your body is cannibalizing itself to keep functioning, and it's only a matter of time before something critical fails. Sometimes you fantasize about food. Real food, a roasted chicken, fresh bread still warm, fruit that isn't dried or preserved. Beer. Medieval people drank a lot of beer because it was safer than water. You haven't had beer in months. You haven't had a proper meal in longer than that. Food dreams are common, vivid, and cruelly realistic. You wake up certain you've just eaten a feast, only to find yourself still in the cold tower with your stale bread and murky water. The monastery below has food, proper food, regular meals, variety. The monks eat bread, yes, but also vegetables from their gardens, fish from their ponds, eggs from their chickens, cheese from their dairy, beer from their brewery. They live communally, eating together in a refectory, following a dietary schedule that ensures adequate nutrition. And then there's you, up in the tower, forgotten except when the bells need ringing, subsisting on scraps and hoping the next delivery of food comes before the current supply runs out entirely. You drink the brown water. You eat the moldy bread. You empty the waste bucket. You survive another day barely. This is your life, sustained by the bare minimum, because bells are more important than bell ringers. You haven't spoken to another human being in 6 days. Not because you've taken a vow of silence, you're not a monk, you're just the guy who makes the noise, but because no one comes up here and you can't leave. The last conversation you had was with the priest who delivered your weekly bread ration. He said, "Here's your bread." And you said, "Thank you." And he said, "God keep you." And then he left, his footsteps fading down the spiral staircase. And that was it. 2 sentences of human interaction. That was 6 days ago. It might as well have been 6 years. Welcome to the psychological nightmare of profound isolation in a job that society desperately needs but desperately wants to forget exists. You are functionally imprisoned in this tower. Not by locked doors or chains, but by duty, by poverty, by the complete absence of alternatives. And the isolation is destroying you in ways that are harder to quantify than hearing loss or frostbite, but no less real. The bells ring on a strict schedule. Matins at 3 a.m., lauds at 5 a.m., prime at 6 a.m., terce at 9 a.m., sext at noon, none at 3 p.m., vespers at 5 p.m., and compline at 7 p.m. That's 8 ringing sessions per day, 7 for the canonical hours plus matins. Each session takes roughly 15 to 30 minutes when you factor in the climb up, the ringing itself, and the climb down. So you're working maybe 3 to 4 hours per day in total, spread across the entire 24-hour cycle, which means you have approximately 20 hours of nothing per day. 20 hours of sitting in a cold stone room with no entertainment, no companionship, no tasks, no purpose except waiting for the next bell session. 20 hours to think about how you ended up here, what your life has become, whether this will ever change. 20 hours is a very long time to be alone with thoughts that are increasingly dark and circular. You can't leave. Technically, you could. There's no lock on the tower, no guard preventing your departure. But leaving means abandoning your post, and abandoning your post means the bells don't ring, and unrung bells mean the monastery schedule collapses, and that means you're fired, homeless, and starving. The job is terrible, but it's a job. It provides room and board, minimal though those are. Without it, you'd be on the streets, begging, probably dead within weeks from exposure or starvation or violence. So you don't leave. You stay. Every day you choose to stay because the alternatives are worse. The tower is your prison, but it's also your entire world. You know every stone in your quarters. You've traced your fingers over them thousands of times. You know the pattern of lichens growing on the exterior wall visible through the arrow slit. You've counted the steps, 300, give or take. You've named the pigeons. You've memorized the sound the wind makes at different speeds through different openings. This intimate knowledge is both a coping mechanism and a symptom of how thoroughly your world has contracted. Human contact, when it happens, is brief and transactional. Someone delivers food. Someone occasionally checks that you're still alive and the bells are still ringing. That's it. No one comes up to chat. No one visits for social reasons. Why would they? You're the bell ringer, a necessary but unpleasant element of church operations. Like the man who empties the cesspits or the woman who washes corpses. Necessary, but not someone you choose to spend time with. The townspeople below can hear the bells, of course. The bells govern their lives. Wake them, call them to prayer, mark their work hours, warn of danger. But they don't think about you. To them, bells just ring, automatically, like sunrise or rain. The fact that a human being is suffering up here to make that happen is irrelevant to their daily experience. You're invisible, noticed only when something goes wrong, when the bells don't ring on schedule. You've tried shouting down from the tower. Early on, when the isolation was new and particularly painful, you'd lean out of the bell chamber openings and yell to people on the ground. "Hello! Beautiful day! Can anyone hear me?" Sometimes people would look up, shield their eyes against the sun, realize the sound was coming from the bell tower, and then just continue with their day. You're too far away for conversation. Your voice is distorted by wind and distance. And besides, who wants to have a shouted conversation with the weird tower hermit? Historians still argue whether medieval society intentionally isolated certain professions or whether isolation was an unintended consequence of practical arrangements. For bell ringers, it's clearly the latter. You need to be near the bells to ring them, and bells are in towers, and towers are isolated by definition. But the effect is the same whether intended or not. You're cut off from human society, living parallel to it rather than within it. The psychological effects compound over time. At first, the isolation is just unpleasant. You miss conversation, miss companionship, miss the casual interactions that make up daily life. But as weeks turn to months, something shifts. Your social skills atrophy. When you do have brief interactions, you find yourself struggling to make appropriate responses. Your sense of humor, what remains of it, has become strange, warped by too much time alone. You laugh at things that aren't funny. You don't laugh at things that are. Your calibration for normal human interaction is broken. You talk to yourself constantly now. Full conversations, both sides, acting out dialogues between imaginary people or between different aspects of your own personality. "We should eat the bread now," you'll say. "No, save it for later." You'll respond in a slightly different voice. "But we're hungry now. We're always hungry. This is normal for you. This is how you maintain the sense that language and communication still exist, even though you're the only participant." The pigeons have become social proxies. You've assigned them personalities. Bastard is aggressive and territorial. Ghost is timid and flighty. Hop, with his damaged foot, is resilient and persistent. You have preferences among the pigeons. You have favorites. You get upset when you don't see a familiar pigeon for several days, worried that it might have died or been taken by a hawk. This is pathological, probably, but it's all you have. The pigeons don't judge you. They don't pity you. They just exist, and their existence is comforting. Sleep becomes strange when you're this isolated. Dreams start to feel more real than waking life, because dreams at least contain other people, conversations, interactions. You've had dreams where you're at a feast, surrounded by friends, laughing and eating and talking, and the emotional impact of those dreams is profound. Waking up is devastating, returning from a dream world of connection to the reality of the cold, empty tower. Sometimes you try to go back to sleep immediately, chasing the dream, desperate to return to that feeling of not being alone. The bell schedule provides structure, which is both good and bad. Good because structure prevents total psychological collapse. You have tasks, you have purpose, you have reasons to get up and move. Bad because the structure is externally imposed and relentless, and it prevents you from ever truly resting or escaping. You can't sleep through the night because matins is at 3 a.m. You can't take a day off because the bells must ring every day. The structure is a framework that holds you together, but it's also bars on a cage. Time becomes elastic and strange. Days blur together because every day is identical. You lose track of which day it is, what week, what month sometimes. The church calendar provides some orientation. Feast days, fast days, holy days. But between these markers, time is an undifferentiated flow of cold and hunger and loneliness. You might be unable to say whether something happened yesterday or 3 days ago. Your memory, usually a reliable record of experience, starts producing errors because there's nothing distinctive to anchor memories to. You've developed superstitions and rituals, small behaviors that give you the illusion of control and provide structure to the vast empty hours. You must touch a specific stone before climbing to ring matins. You must count your steps every time. You must check on Ghost the pigeon at least once per day. These rituals are meaningless objectively, but they're critically important to your mental state. They create order. They create meaning. They're something you choose to do rather than something imposed on you. The awareness that you're losing your mind is itself maddening. You can observe yourself talking to pigeons, conducting conversations with yourself, following arbitrary rituals, and part of your brain recognizes that this is not normal behavior. But you can't stop. The behaviors are adaptive. They help you survive psychologically in an environment that was never meant to sustain human life long term. You're going mad in the most reasonable way possible, which is a paradox you don't have the energy to unpack. Money is almost irrelevant, but worth mentioning. You're paid technically. The church provides some small monetary compensation in addition to room and board. But the amount is pittance, maybe a few pennies per week, barely enough to buy anything even if you could leave the tower to go shopping, which you can't. The money accumulates uselessly. You have nothing to spend it on. No markets to visit, no goods to purchase, no services to employ. You're living in a monetized economy but completely outside it, a feudal serf in a slightly different form. Your social status is complicated. You're employed by the church, which gives you some legitimacy. You're not a beggar or a criminal, but you're also not respected. Bell ringers occupy a strange liminal space in medieval social hierarchy, necessary but not valued, employed but not honored. Parents don't tell their children, study hard so you can be a bell ringer someday. It's a job for people who have no other options. The poor, the disabled, the desperate, the criminal trying to escape their past. When you eventually leave this tower, if you survive long enough to retire or be replaced, you'll find that the isolation has permanently changed you. Former bell ringers are recognizable by their social awkwardness, their tendency towards solitary behavior, their difficulty with normal conversation and interaction. You'll have spent years alone during the period when social skills should be maintained and refined. Those skills will be gone, and rebuilding them in middle age or later is nearly impossible. There's a particular cruelty in being isolated while surrounded by people. You can see the town from your tower. You watch people going about their lives, working, talking, trading, fighting, celebrating. You're maybe 200 feet away from vibrant human society, and you might as well be on a different planet. The proximity makes the separation worse. You're not isolated in a wilderness where loneliness is expected. You're isolated in the middle of civilization, forgotten in plain sight. Sometimes you imagine conversations you'd have if anyone cared to listen. You'd tell them about the bells, about the mechanical challenges, about the weather and the animals and the constant danger. You'd explain what this life is really like, correct their assumption that it's just ringing bells a few times per day. But no one asks. No one cares. The bells ring, the world continues, and you're just the mechanism that makes it happen. The loneliest moment is right after the bells finish ringing. Down below, the sound has called the monks to prayer or announced noon or marked the evening. People have heard, have responded, have incorporated the bell into their lives. And up here, you're standing in the silence that follows, alone, knowing that your next human interaction is probably days away. 6 days since the last conversation. Probably 4 more until the next. You count them. You mark them somehow, scratches on stone maybe. You survive them. The tower is patient. The isolation is eternal. And you're trapped here until something finally breaks. The machinery, your body, or your mind. Probably all three eventually. So why did anyone do this? Why would anyone voluntarily or semi-voluntarily choose this life of cold, deafness, isolation, danger, and slow physical deterioration? Why would you wake up at 3 a.m. every single day to pull a rope that's destroying your hearing, climb stairs that might kill you, live with vermin, eat moldy bread, and exist in crushing loneliness? The answer is complicated, depressing, and ultimately very human, because the alternatives were worse. Let's start with the most obvious motivator: poverty. You took this job because you were desperate. Maybe you were a landless peasant whose family couldn't feed another mouth. Maybe you were orphaned and had no trade, no guild membership, no patron. Maybe you committed some minor crime and this was penance that came with room and board instead of prison or execution. Medieval Europe was not kind to people without resources or connections. The social safety net consisted of the church's charity and whatever relatives might take you in, and if neither of those worked out, your options were begging, crime, starvation, or jobs that literally nobody else wanted. Bell ringing falls into that last category. It's work that's necessary but that no one with better options would choose. The pay is terrible, you're getting pennies plus room and board, and we've discussed how minimal that room and board actually is. But terrible pay is better than no pay. A freezing stone tower is better than sleeping in streets. Moldy bread is better than no bread. You're surviving barely, and that's more than you'd be doing otherwise. The church actively recruited from the desperate classes. Monasteries and cathedrals needed bell ringers, and they found them among the poor, the disabled, the marginal. If you had a bad leg that prevented heavy farm labor but you could still climb stairs and pull a rope, bell ringer. If you were too old for most work but still had strength in your arms, bell ringer. If you'd committed a crime and the church offered this position as an alternative to secular punishment, bell ringer. The job was a receptacle for people society had no other use for. Some bell ringers were there for religious reasons, though probably fewer than the church would like to claim. Medieval Christianity offered the concept of redemptive suffering, the idea that earthly suffering brought you closer to God, earned divine favor, reduced your time in purgatory. If you were particularly devout or particularly convinced of your own sinfulness, you might view the bell tower as a kind of self-imposed monastery, a place to suffer for God's glory. The constant noise, the isolation, the hardship, these could be reframed as spiritual disciplines, tests of faith, opportunities for martyrdom. But let's be honest, most bell ringers probably weren't there for mystical reasons. They were there because they needed a job and this was the job available. Any religious justification came later, a way to make sense of suffering, to find meaning in misery. I'm not just going deaf. I'm sacrificing my hearing for God. I'm not trapped. I'm choosing holy isolation. These narratives help psychologically, but they're retrofitting meaning onto circumstances that are primarily economic. Duty and obligation kept people in the tower even when the initial desperation faded. Medieval society ran on obligation, feudal obligations, family obligations, religious obligations. Once you took the position, you were expected to fulfill it. Breaking your commitment to the church wasn't just quitting a job. It was a moral failing, possibly a sin. The social pressure to continue, to not abandon your post, to honor your word was immense. Your sense of self-worth, such as it was, became tied to being the person who does this impossible job. You endured because endurance itself became your identity. Some bell ringers were criminals serving informal sentences. The church had its own justice system, and exile to a bell tower was a creative form of punishment. Not as harsh as execution, more severe than simple penance. You'd be alive, technically free, but suffering constantly in service to the church you'd wronged. This served multiple purposes: punishment for the wrongdoer, deterrent for others, and convenient staffing for an unpopular position. If you were a bell ringer by judicial mandate, leaving early wasn't an option. You served your time, however long that was, or faced worse consequences. There's also the factor of limited information. When you took this job, you probably didn't fully understand what it entailed. The church authorities who hired you weren't forthcoming about the hearing loss, the isolation, the danger, the conditions. They said, "Ring the bells several times per day. We'll provide room and board." That sounds manageable. Only after you're in the tower do you discover the full horror of it. And by then, you've already committed, already given up whatever marginal life you had before, already burned bridges. Going back isn't possible. You can only go forward, into the bells and the cold and the silence between human contacts. Historians still argue whether medieval people experienced suffering differently than modern people, whether they had different pain thresholds, different psychological resilience, different expectations of what life should be. The answer seems to be no, not really. Medieval people hurt and feared and despaired just like anyone else. But their context was different. A world where most people were cold, hungry, and working brutal jobs normalized suffering in a way that's hard for comfortable modern people to grasp. Your suffering in the bell tower was extreme, yes, but it existed on a continuum with the suffering of the peasant breaking his back in the fields, the miner dying of lung disease, the woman dying in childbirth. Everyone suffered. You just suffered in a specific way. The tower also offered something paradoxical, a kind of freedom. You were isolated, yes, but that meant you were also unsupervised. No lord looking over your shoulder. No guild master checking your work. No family obligations demanding your time and energy. Between bell sessions, your time was your own. You could think what you wanted, do what you wanted within the physical constraints of the tower, be who you wanted. For someone who'd spent their whole life under someone else's control, and in medieval society, most people were under someone's control, the tower's isolation was oppressive but also liberating. Some bell ringers developed genuine affection for their bells. This sounds insane, and maybe it is, but spending years with an object that's the center of your existence creates a relationship, however one-sided. You knew your bell's personality, how it swung, what sound it made, its quirks and difficulties. You took pride, perhaps, in making it ring properly, in maintaining the mechanism, in doing your job well despite the conditions. The bell was destroying you, but it was also your life's work, and humans have an incredible capacity to find meaning and dignity in their work, no matter how terrible. The alternative futures were genuinely worse. If you left the tower, where would you go? Back to begging? Back to whatever circumstances of poverty and desperation led you here in the first place. At least in the tower, you were fed, however poorly. You had shelter, however cold. You had purpose, however painful. The devil you knew versus the devil you didn't, and you chose to stay with the bells. Length of service varied wildly. Some bell ringers died within months. Falls, exposure, disease, or simple bad luck. These positions had high turnover not because people quit, but because people died. Other bell ringers lasted decades, becoming so adapted to the tower that they couldn't imagine leaving. Their hearing was gone, their social skills destroyed, their bodies broken. They were unemployable anywhere else. The tower had become their entire world, and staying was easier than trying to rebuild a life on the ground. There are records, sparse but real, of bell ringers who served for 20, 30, even 40 years. Imagine 40 years of this. 40 years of the bells, the stairs, the cold, the isolation. By the end, These individuals were profoundly deaf, probably half-mad, physically destroyed. But they'd survived. There was a grim pride in that, a sense of having endured something that would have killed weaker people. They were the ones who didn't fall, who didn't quit, who rang the bells every day for decades. The church sometimes honored these long-serving bell ringers, gave them special mention in records, provided for them in their final years. Small consolation for a life spent suffering, but humans take consolation where they can find it. The theological framework helped some people bear it. If you believed, truly believed, that your suffering had cosmic significance, that God was watching and approving, that your earthly pain was earning heavenly reward, then the bells became bearable. Not easy, not pleasant, but bearable because they meant something beyond the immediate physical reality. Prayer helped. Ritual helped. The sense that you were serving a purpose larger than yourself, that the bells were calling the faithful to worship, that you were a small but necessary part of the great machinery of salvation. This could sustain you through the worst moments. But faith wasn't enough for everyone. Some bell ringers lost their faith in the tower, couldn't reconcile a loving God with their daily suffering. These individuals faced an additional existential crisis. Not only were they physically suffering, but they'd lost the narrative that made the suffering meaningful. If God wasn't real or wasn't watching or didn't care, then the bells were just noise and you were just a victim and none of it mattered. That realization, on top of everything else, broke people. The ones who survived long-term developed coping mechanisms that outsiders would call madness. Talking to yourself, treating animals as people, creating elaborate rituals and superstitions, finding meaning in random patterns. These are symptoms of psychological breakdown, but they're also tools for survival. Your mind was adapting to an environment it wasn't designed for, finding ways to meet social needs that couldn't be met, creating structure where none existed. You were going mad in self-defense, and it worked, sort of, enough to keep you alive and functional. There's something darkly admirable about bell ringers as a class. They did the job nobody else would do. They suffered conditions that would break most people. They maintained the bells, kept the schedule, preserved an essential social function at enormous personal cost. Medieval society needed bell ringers desperately but treated them as disposable, honored the bells but forgot the ringers. It's a pattern that repeats throughout history. The people doing the worst jobs, suffering the most, are the ones society tries hardest to ignore. You're still here in the tower after all this. Months or years of cold and noise and loneliness, and you're still climbing those stairs, still pulling those ropes, still surviving. Why? Maybe because leaving requires energy you don't have. Maybe because this is your identity now and you don't know how to be anything else. Maybe because some stubborn part of you refuses to let the tower win, refuses to be another body carried down those stairs, refuses to give the church the satisfaction of needing to find a replacement. Or maybe, and this is the hardest truth, maybe you stay because you've accepted that this is your life, this is what you are, and fighting against it requires hope you no longer have. You're not enduring heroically. You're not suffering nobly. You're just surviving day by day, bell by bell, because stopping would require a decision and you've run out of decisions. The tower has you. The bells own you. And you'll ring them until you can't, and then someone else will take your place, and the cycle will continue. The bells must ring. That's the only constant, the only certainty, the only thing that matters to anyone who isn't you. Down below, people hear the bells and organize their lives around them, never thinking about the destroyed human being making it happen. Up here, you pull the rope, your ears screaming with tinnitus, your hands bleeding, your body failing, your mind unraveling. And tomorrow you'll do it again, because that's what bell ringers do. That's what you are now, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, definitely poorer, in sickness and in health, definitely sickness, until death do you part from these goddamn bells. The alternatives were worse. The alternatives are still worse. So you stay. You ring. You endure. The night is settling in now, beyond your tower. Compline was hours ago, the last bell of the day, the one that released you from duty until matins comes around again at 3 a.m. You've got a few hours to rest, though rest is a generous term for lying on a thin mat in the cold, listening to pigeons and your own breathing and the endless ringing in your ears that never stops, never fades, never gives you peace. But tonight, let yourself imagine something different. Imagine warm blankets, soft pillows, a quiet room where the loudest sound is your own heartbeat slowing towards sleep. Imagine a full stomach, clean water, hands that don't hurt. Imagine tomorrow being different from today. Imagine possibilities and choices and futures that extend beyond these stone walls. You'll probably never have those things. The tower is your world until it isn't anymore. But imagining them is free. And in the space between the last bell and the next, in these quiet hours where you're still alive, still breathing, still somehow persisting despite everything, in these hours you can let yourself rest. Let the cold fade from your awareness. Let the pain recede. Let the loneliness dissolve into the darkness. Let yourself drift, gently, into whatever peace sleep can offer. The bells will still be there in the morning. The tower will still be waiting. But that's morning's problem. Tonight, in this moment, you can simply be. Let the stone walls support you. Let the darkness hold you. Let the rhythm of your breathing carry you away from this place. Just for a while. Just until the bells call again. You've survived another day. That's enough. That's more than enough. Rest now. Let the tower fade. Let everything fade. The bells can wait. Sleep cannot. Drift now. Gently. Softly, into the quiet spaces between the ringing, into peace such as it is, into sleep,